As much as I did promise Madeline that I would talk about US politics, I soon came to realise the only thing I wanted to talk about was drones, like, forever. So if given a platform, I'll do it now. Okay, so what are drones? I'm sure you've all sort of heard of them. If you're a bit unaware, they are pretty much unmanned aerial vehicles. I'm specifically going to talk about unmanned combat aerial vehicles, but they're pretty much just pilotless planes. And so YouTube is full of like army freaks talking about them.
One Predator has a wingspan of about 50 feet. It flies approximately 80 miles an hour at 20,000 feet. It costs $3.8 million, which is significantly less than most other aircraft the military flies today. It's also a unique value because of the incredible intelligence that it provides to commanders that don't...
Okay, so the rest of that's just propaganda. But they do look a little bit different to what a regular sort of, I don't know, military plane does. But they are pretty effective. So when you see... Oh, I can't use the internet. When you see one of them... how do I...
Control and then click it.
Okay.
No, hold.
I am.
Stay away from microphone TV.
Okay, I'm sorry. So when you see one of them actually launch an attack, they're still pretty effective. And so we can just watch this go. So they can carry, I mean, they're getting more and more advanced, and like the CIA would never actually tell us how advanced they are. But what we do know is that they can carry 2 Hellfire missiles, which are very large and very powerful. So that's what like one of them does. But yeah, they're pretty cool. Okay. So when are they used? Okay, so I'll get to sort of the alleged benefits of them. But one of the things that a lot of people claim is that they absolutely remove the need to have a piloted plane. So the pilot sits in like a station somewhere on the ground, in like a container. They literally sit in a shipping container, and they have like a simulation of what the drone sees. But yeah, they're not actually in the plane. So there's a lot of arguments as to why this is a good thing. One of them is that it's sort of like a mediation between, or a middle point in between using just like a bomb and needing to use ground forces when you want to kill people. So they were first used in Bosnia in 1995, purely for reconnaissance, in terms of like aerial surveillance. And then in 2001, the first successful drone strike, well, drone delivery was used, and that was the first time they were able to put a missile onto it and use it to blow shit up. So they're used almost exclusively by the US, but a few days ago the UK actually launched a successful drone, had a practice drone strike in which they actually did successfully. So the countries that the US admits to using drone strikes at the moment are Pakistan, Yemen, and Somalia. They've also been used in Iran and Afghanistan, but in sort of a different context. So what I think is really important to note about drones is that they don't fall under the Department of Defense, or like they aren't a military strategy. So they actually come from the CIA. So this is just the CIA command structure. So the Counterterrorism Center, which is this one here, which was established in 2001, post-September 11th, is the organization which gathers the intelligence on who is on the drone strike list. So they decide who gets to be killed. And then it just goes up the command to the president, who actually has to sign off on each drone strike. But it's really interesting to note that because drone strikes fall under the CIA command and not the military command, that means they're not necessarily under the same sort of like obligations or the same like, what's the word I'm looking for? Scrutiny. Thank you, Gemma. It doesn't fall under like the same military scrutiny that other strikes do, because it's under the CIA command, and therefore it's far more secretive. And you can see some really big changes from the Bush administration to the Obama administration in terms of the frequency with which they're used. So the place where they're most commonly used is in Pakistan. And I'd really recommend that everyone went away and learnt a lot of things about Pakistan, because it's probably one of the areas which people don't have a lot of knowledge in, but it is a bit of a clusterfuck of a country and tends to come up a lot. So the first drone strike in Pakistan was in 2004, and it was in South Waziristan against the leader of Al-Qaeda there, whose name was Nek Mohammed. And he had been a big problem for the Pakistani government for a long time. But the interesting thing was that the US, or the CIA, sought permission by which to launch the strike, and Pakistan said you can launch the strike, but only if the ISI, which is like Pakistani intelligence, can claim credit for it. So Pakistan and the US went along with this like little alliance where the US would strike things in Pakistan and Pakistan will claim credit. But it wasn't very long until like people worked out Pakistan doesn't actually have like the capabilities to do that, and they just had to come clean about drones being used. But the current Pakistani position is that they don't consent to drone strikes within their country, but actually they do. It's just for many reasons they say that they can't. So here is just some like visualization of what drone strikes in Pakistan, like the frequency and significance. Oh, well, that doesn't work, does it? Oh. Let's ignore that. Okay. So like what that data would have shown you is that from 2004 to 2008, strikes in Pakistan weren't very frequent. But from 2008 onwards with the Obama regime, they are very, very frequent in Pakistan. And the data actually shows you the number of children, civilians, and high-profile targets which are actually killed. So for every high-profile target killed, there is approximately 30 combatants, 10 civilians, and 5 children killed. So I guess that's some interesting statistics in terms of deciding whether the targeted like people who drone strikes go out to kill are actually that effective, and whether there is a minimization of collateral damage in the process. So the other places they're used are Yemen and Somalia. So I'm not really sure why Yemen doesn't come up in debating more often, because it's actually a very interesting place. Many people disagree with me on this one, but I think it is anyways. So Yemen had a revolution in 2011 as part of the Arab Spring, in which Al-Qaeda is now just in all-out war with the government, which like receives US backing. And so it is a real big clusterfuck for Yemen. And since the invasion of Afghanistan, it's now Al-Qaeda's safe haven. And so Yemen, there are many, many drone strikes taking place. The most significant drone strike killed Anwar al-Awlaki in 2011. I know like often people just think, these Al-Qaeda names mean nothing. He was particularly significant because he was the only US citizen who was a member of like the senior Al-Qaeda organization. He was the person who organized the Fort Hood shooting in 2009, where a US soldier went crazy on like a military base in the US. Also, he was so significant because he's the only senior member of Al-Qaeda who could speak English. So he was the guy who ran their YouTube page and their magazine. And he was like the voice of Al-Qaeda in like the English-speaking world. So he was quite a significant kill. Also significant because he's the only, well, him and his son are the only known US citizens to have died in drone strikes. It's a little bit more unclear in Somalia what the US is necessarily doing there. So there's only 2 confirmed strikes against Al-Shabaab. There's a suggestion that they're using just surveillance against Somali pirates. No one knows what is going on there. It's probably not going to come up, but for the sake of breadth, there you go. Okay, so significantly in terms of debating about drones, so I've just outlined some arguments for and against, and I think these are the kind of things that you can probably think about for yourselves. I'll just go through some of them which I think are perhaps a little bit, I don't know, less obvious. So one of the main arguments for drone efficient is the idea that drones are more efficient than other military tactics because you can target people better, they use different and better intelligence. And so I think when you're talking about that sort of thing, you need to be clear that it is something that is coming from the CIA rather than the military, and not just conflate them as the same things, because they have very different chains of command, very different ways in which they gather information. I think that's something that you should know. And so one of the arguments often leveled is that they reduce collateral damage in that they are far more targeted than bombs, they're less destructive than like ground invasions. So those are some things to consider. I think one of the strongest arguments in terms of using drones is that they carry less risk to US troops or any other troops who would go on to acquire drone technology. So I think that is probably one of the strongest arguments in support of that. Katie Heading is a huge advocate for drones. So if you're interested in talking about that further, definitely see her. Also, like there is like a lot of discussion about the Australian government picking up drone technology to use it to like survey the border and identify boats coming in and stuff. So there's a huge argument in terms that they are better for surveillance than just like satellite technology is. So that's also something to consider. So arguments against, there are certainly arguments to make that they are no more efficient than like other forms of military tactics. And I think one of the main things that you would want to discuss is that there is a lack of oversight and accountability, and that's because it has like a different structure to what I've already spoken about. So like with the US military, you have Senate hearings when things go wrong, like Abu Ghraib and things like that. Because the CIA is so much more secretive and like can be so much more secretive, there is necessarily a lack of oversight and accountability about when drone strikes are used, how often they're used, and what's the fallout of that. So those are some ideas that you definitely want to consider. The other main argument people use when saying drones are bad, and I'm not sure how much legitimacy I give it, but I think it's still something you should think about, is this idea that because there is a remoteness of killing, there isn't like even a pilot in a plane, it's someone not even in that country who's controlling the drone, that it necessarily makes it more like a video game or something like that, and it means that war is easier because you don't see the human casualties as much. I, again, don't necessarily know if I buy into that, but I think that there's a strong argument that you could make. And then the last sort of thing is like standard drone strikes radicalize people, all war does. But like you could definitely discuss why perhaps this more so than other things. And then there is, of course, the idea that they are illegal. I don't know how much credence I give that, given that I think most war is probably illegal. But again, these are just things that you should think about if you want to talk about drones. Does anyone have any questions? I know that this is quite a specific part of military like strategy and things like that, and it maybe isn't necessarily something that's at the forefront of your mind, but I think it is something which is increasingly becoming a bit of a frontline issue. So yeah, if anyone has any questions, go for gold. Yeah, Rowan?
I have something on like general facts, is that drones are a lot cheaper than normal aircraft. Is that actually true, or is that a like what?
Yeah, I have also heard that to be the case. I don't know the figures for sure, but I don't think it is. Like, I think, yeah, I don't think.
It takes like 50 to 100 men to man them, and they are expensive as fuck to put together. The drones, planes are significantly cheaper than drones.
Yeah.
The only thing that might come to a price differentiation is having to replace the pilots.
Look on the internet if you want some facts.
Yeah.
It's definitely one of the areas though where internet facts are often distorted by political biases, so be careful about the source you're using if you're trying to research this.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with those sentiments. And also, I think the best way to go about that is not just to think about like what is purely cheaper in terms of like a bomb or a drone, but like what is cheaper in terms of like a bomb and the necessarily like military follow-up that happens with that, because it's often quite difficult to just drop a bomb and then fuck off. Like often that is part of a wider scale like military engagement. Whereas the idea about drones is that you can literally get in and get out without any like human involvement at all. So I think maybe like look at it more in that context than just like pure price differentiation. Did anyone else have anything else? Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Where does the legal authority come in? Did that come in as a result of the act that was voted on after September 11th?
Yeah, so all of this, like, I mean, they were testing that, like, obviously drone technology existed before, but the entire basis of the program came in post-September 11th, and it's all overseen by National Counterterrorism Centre, which is pretty much a law unto its own, so it has very little oversight, and yeah, there's only about 4 people who review things before it goes straight to the president, so it's pretty secretive. Anyone else? Okay, cool. Thanks, guys.